A single dog tag floated in the surf, spinning in the red foam. 0645 hours. Omaha Beach. Sergeant Hayes crouched behind a steel hedgehog, seawater mixing with blood at his boots. 32 men had followed him off the Higgins boat. 11 were still moving. The German MG-42 on the bluff had been firing for 9 minutes without stopping. 1,500 rounds per minute. Hayes counted the seconds between bursts. 3. Not enough time to cross 40 yards of open sand. But the men pinned behind the seawall were dying from mortar fire. Stay here, they all die slow. Move now, some might make it. Hayes had carried a rifle through North Africa and Sicily. He knew the difference between courage and suicide. This morning, that line had vanished. He checked his rifle. 8 rounds. The MG-42 paused to reload. Hayes stood. 3 seconds. He started running. The first bullets kicked up sand 2 feet to his left. Hayes kept his eyes on the seawall. The men there were flat against the concrete, faces pressed into the stones. He could see their helmets. He could see their rifles. He could not see if they were breathing. The MG-42 found its range. Rounds cracked past his head. Hayes dropped and rolled behind a destroyed Bangalore torpedo. Metal fragments dug into his shoulder. He counted to 5. The gun was tracking right, chasing another runner. Hayes pushed up and sprinted. His boots slipped in the wet sand. The beach had looked flat from the boat. It was not flat. Shell craters pocked the ground every few yards. Bodies floated in some of them. Equipment sank in others. Hayes jumped one crater, landed hard on the far side. His ankle twisted. Pain shot up his leg. He ignored it. Pain could wait. Stopping meant dying. He kept moving. The tide had turned the sand into soup. Every step took effort. Hayes's legs burned. His lungs screamed. He was 34 years old, too old to be running through machine gun fire. But age did not matter here. Only speed, only reaching cover. Hayes focused on the seawall. 20 yards. 15. 10. The MG-42 swung back toward him. Hayes dove. He felt a round tug his pack. Then he was rolling, tumbling against the concrete. Safe, for now. He hit the seawall hard. His helmet cracked against the concrete. Stars bloomed in his vision. Someone grabbed his webbing and pulled him down. Hayes blinked. A private stared at him. The kid's face was white. His hands were shaking. Hayes knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror once. The private's name tag said Coleman. He was maybe 20. His rifle lay in the sand beside him, still wrapped in its protective cover. Hayes pulled the cover off and handed the weapon back. Coleman took it but did not move. 3 other men crouched nearby. 2 were wounded. The third was trying to open a canteen with hands that would not stop shaking. Hayes looked up at the bluff. The German position sat about 80 yards above them. A concrete bunker, 2 machine gun ports. The MG-42 in the right port had not stopped firing since Hayes landed. The left port was quiet. That meant they had a second gun waiting. Hayes had learned that trick in Sicily. Let the enemy think you only have one weapon. Wait until they commit. Then open up with the second. A mortar round hit 20 yards down the seawall. Rocks and sand rained down. Coleman pressed himself flatter. Hayes counted the wounded. 7 men needed help. 2 were unconscious. The rest were trying to stop their own bleeding. One soldier had taken shrapnel through his leg. He had tied a tourniquet above the knee, but the fabric was already soaked through. Hayes checked his watch. The tourniquet had been on for 12 minutes. After 20, they would have to decide whether to save the leg or save the man. Hayes scanned the beach. More men were coming in. Some made it to cover. Most did not. The tide was bringing in bodies. Hayes recognized some of them. Martinez from 3rd Squad. Bishop from Weapons Platoon. The dog tag he had seen in the surf belonged to someone. He did not let himself think about who. The soldier with the tourniquet spoke. His voice was quiet. He said his name was Jennings. He asked if they were going to make it off the beach. Hayes looked at him. Jennings was 19. His service record said he had been a mechanic before the war. He had 2 sisters in Michigan. Hayes had read every file on the transport ship. He believed that if you were going to lead men into battle, you should know their names. Hayes told him they were going to make it. Jennings nodded. He did not look like he believed it. Hayes did not blame him. Hayes was not sure he believed it either. Another mortar round hit. This one was closer. The explosion threw sand over the seawall. Hayes tasted copper. His ears rang. When the ringing faded, he heard someone screaming. Not words, just sound. Hayes crawled toward the noise. A corporal sat against the wall, holding his arm. The hand was gone. The wrist ended in shredded tissue. Hayes pulled a bandage from his aid pouch. The corporal's eyes were wide. He kept saying he needed his hand. He was a piano player. He needed his hand. Hayes wrapped the stump tight. He told the corporal to hold pressure. The corporal nodded, but his eyes were empty. Shock was setting in. Hayes had seen it before. The body kept moving, but the mind went somewhere else. Somewhere the hand was still attached. Somewhere the piano was still waiting. Coleman crawled over. He asked what they were supposed to do. Hayes looked at the private. Coleman's rifle was still in his hands, but his finger was not on the trigger. Hayes told him to get the wounded into a line, put the worst cases closest to cover, get the ones who could still move ready to run. Coleman asked where they were running to. Hayes pointed up the bluff. Coleman stared at him. He asked if Hayes was serious. Hayes said yes. The MG-42 fired another burst. Bullets chipped concrete above their heads. Dust fell on their helmets. Hayes counted 6 more men down on the beach. The tide was coming in fast. In another hour, the water would reach the seawall. Anyone still down there would drown. Hayes had not told the men that part. He checked his ammunition. 8 rounds in the rifle. 2 magazines in his pouch. 1 grenade. He had lost his pack in the water. The pack had contained rations, extra socks, and a letter from his wife. The letter said she was pregnant. Hayes had read it 20 times on the ship. He had memorized every word. Now it was somewhere in the channel, soaking in salt water. The words were still in his head. That would have to be enough. Hayes looked at his watch again. 0653 hours. They had been pinned for 8 minutes. It felt like 8 hours. Time moved differently under fire. Seconds stretched. Minutes collapsed. Hayes had learned that in Tunisia, his first real firefight, he had been a corporal then. His sergeant had been hit in the first minute. Hayes had taken command. They had held a bridge for 4 hours. It felt like 4 days. When it was over, Hayes could not remember most of it. Just fragments. The sound of the browning. The smell of cordite. The way the sergeant's blood looked black in the moonlight. That sergeant had taught Hayes 3 things. 1. Take care of your men. 2. Lead from the front. 3. When you have to choose between a bad option and a worse option, choose fast. Hesitation killed more soldiers than bullets. Hayes was facing that choice now. Stay behind the seawall and wait for support, or go up the bluff and take out the MG-42. Support might not come. The beach was chaos. Officers were dead or scattered. Radio communications were jammed. The naval bombardment had missed most of the German positions. The Air Force had dropped their bombs 3 miles inland. The plan had fallen apart before the first boat touched sand. So it came down to Hayes and 11 men. 11 men who were not dead yet. Hayes intended to keep it that way. He crawled down the line. He checked each soldier. Jennings with the tourniquet. A private named Sullivan with shrapnel in his back. A sergeant named Torres, who had taken a bullet through the shoulder. Torres was older, maybe 35. His eyes were clear. He asked Hayes what the plan was. Hayes told him. Torres listened. Then he nodded. He said it was a bad plan. Hayes agreed. Torres said it was better than no plan. Hayes agreed with that too. Torres had his own squad somewhere on the beach. He did not know if they were alive. He had lost sight of them when the ramp dropped. The boat next to theirs had taken a direct hit. Torres had gone into the water carrying 60 pounds of gear. He had ditched most of it to stay afloat. Now he had a rifle, 2 magazines, and a canteen. He asked Hayes if that was enough. Hayes said it would have to be. Coleman came back. He said the wounded were organized. 5 could not move. 6 could walk with help. Hayes asked about ammunition. Coleman counted. 43 rounds total among the men who could still fight. Less than 1 magazine per man. Hayes asked about grenades. Coleman said 3. Hayes asked about explosives. Coleman said nothing. The engineers were supposed to bring the charges. Hayes had not seen any engineers make it off the beach. Hayes looked up at the bunker again. The MG-42 was still firing. It traversed left and right, sweeping the beach in steady arcs. The German gunner knew his business. He fired in short bursts, 6 to 10 rounds, then shifted position. It made him hard to target. It also saved ammunition. The Germans were smart that way. They had been fighting for 5 years. They knew how to make bullets last. Hayes tried to remember the briefings. The intelligence officers had shown them maps, diagrams, photographs. They said the bunkers were lightly defended. They said the naval guns would destroy most of the positions. They said air support would handle the rest. They said the beach would be clear by 0700 hours. It was 0656 hours. The beach was not clear. Hayes wondered if the intelligence officers were still alive. He wondered if they felt responsible for the bodies in the surf. He wondered if they had ever been shot at. Probably not. Planning a battle and fighting a battle were different things. Hayes had done both. Fighting was simpler. You pointed your rifle and you pulled the trigger. Planning required guessing what the enemy would do. The enemy rarely cooperated. In Tunisia, Hayes had learned that lesson the hard way. His unit had assaulted a bridge. Intelligence said it was lightly defended. Intelligence was wrong. 2 companies of German paratroopers held the position. Veterans from Crete. They had cut Hayes's platoon to pieces in the first 5 minutes. Hayes had been a corporal then. His sergeant took a bullet through the throat in the opening seconds. Hayes grabbed the man's Thompson and started firing. He did not remember making that decision. His body just moved. Muscle memory from 1,000 training drills. He killed 3 Germans that night. Maybe more. He did not count. Counting seemed disrespectful somehow, like turning men into numbers. Sicily had been different. Less brutal. More confusion. Hayes' company landed in the wrong place, 3 miles from their objective. They had marched through the night, found their target at dawn, an airfield. Empty. The Germans had pulled out hours before. Hayes and his men sat on the runway eating K-rations while planes landed. Easy day. Hayes did not trust easy days. They always came with a price. The price came 3 days later. Ambush on a mountain road. Hayes lost 6 men. Good men. Men whose files he had memorized on the transport. That was when Hayes learned the most important lesson of war. Plans were fantasies. The enemy had their own plans. Terrain did not cooperate. Weather did not care. The only thing you could control was how you reacted when everything went wrong. Hayes reacted fast. He reacted with aggression. He reacted by moving forward even when staying put seemed smarter. That approach kept him alive. It also got him promoted. The army liked sergeants who solved problems. Dead problems could not come back. A new sound cut through the gunfire. Whistling. Hayes knew that sound. Incoming artillery. He yelled for everyone to get down. The shell hit 30 yards to the right. The explosion was enormous. A fountain of sand and water rose into the air. When it fell, 3 more men were down. Hayes did not look at their faces. He could not afford to. Not yet. There would be time for that later. If there was a later, Torres crawled over. He said they needed to move now. The Germans were finding their range. The next shell would land closer. Hayes agreed. He looked at the wounded. 5 men could not walk. They would have to stay. Hayes told Coleman to give them all the morphine. Coleman asked what would happen to them. Hayes did not answer. They both knew. Jennings grabbed Hayes's arm. He said he could still fight. Hayes looked at the tourniquet. It had been on for 18 minutes. Jennings' face was pale. His lips were blue. Hayes told him to stay down. Jennings said he did not come all this way to die behind a wall. Hayes understood. He told Jennings to take off the tourniquet. Jennings stared at him. Hayes said if he was going to fight, he needed both hands. The leg would bleed. Maybe he would make it. Maybe he would not. But he would die on his feet. Jennings unwrapped the fabric. Blood welled up immediately. He pressed his hand against the wound. He stood. His legs shook. He picked up his rifle. Hayes asked if he could walk. Jennings took 3 steps. His face went white, but he stayed upright. He said he could walk. Hayes counted his assault team. Torres, Coleman, Jennings, Sullivan, who had shrapnel in his back but could still move. 2 more privates, Jackson and Ford. 6 men, plus Hayes made 7. 7 men against a fortified bunker. The odds were not good. Hayes had beaten worse odds. Once, in Sicily. That had been a different situation. But the principle was the same. Speed, aggression, surprise. The Germans expected them to stay pinned, so they would do the opposite. Hayes gathered the men. He explained the plan. Simple, fast, probably fatal. They would split into 2 groups. Hayes, Torres, and Coleman would go straight up the bluff, draw fire, keep the MG-42 focused on them. Jennings, Sullivan, Jackson, and Ford would flank right, find the bunker's blind spot, get in close, throw grenades, eliminate the gun. Sullivan asked what happened if the flanking team got cut down. Hayes said the assault team would finish the job. Sullivan asked what happened if both teams got cut down. Hayes said nothing. There was no good answer to that question. Ford spoke for the first time. He was a kid, maybe 18. His voice cracked when he asked how they would know when to start. Hayes said they would know. Ford did not look satisfied, but he nodded. Hayes checked his watch one more time. 07:02 hours. 17 minutes since the ramp dropped. It felt like 17 years. Hayes looked at each man. Torres was ready. Coleman was scared but steady. Jennings was bleeding but focused. Sullivan, Jackson, and Ford looked like they might bolt. Hayes gave them the only thing he could. He told them they were going to make it. He told them to trust each other. He told them to move fast and stay low. He told them when they got to the top of the bluff, there would be a trench. The trench would lead inland. Once they reached the trench, they would be out of the kill zone. After that, it was just a war, and war was something they could handle. Torres asked what Hayes had done before the army. Hayes said he had been a high school coach. Football. Torres laughed. He said this was worse than football. Hayes agreed. He said football had rules. Torres said football did not have MG-42. Hayes said that too. The shelling stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Hayes knew what that meant. The Germans were adjusting fire. The next barrage would be more accurate. They had about 60 seconds. Hayes gave the signal. The flanking team moved first. They crawled right, staying low. The sand was torn up from shell impacts. It gave them some cover. Not much, but some. Hayes counted to 10. Then he stood. Torres and Coleman stood with him. They ran straight at the bluff. The MG-42 opened up immediately. Rounds snapped past. Hayes felt one tug his sleeve. Another sparked off his helmet. He kept running. His boots sank into the soft sand. Every step was a fight. He pushed harder. The bluff rose in front of him. Steep, maybe 70 degrees. Clay and loose rock. Hayes hit the slope and started climbing. His hands clawed at the dirt. Rocks came loose and tumbled down. He heard Coleman behind him breathing hard. He heard Torres cursing in Spanish. The MG-42 kept firing. Bullets chopped into the bluff. Dirt exploded around them. Hayes climbed. His lungs burned. His legs shook. He grabbed a bush and pulled himself up. The bush tore free. He slid back 3 feet. He grabbed again. This time it held. He hauled himself higher. The bunker was above him now, maybe 30 feet. The MG-42 was so loud it felt like it was inside his skull. He could see the muzzle flash. He could see spent brass falling from the gun port. The clay was slick. Recent rain had turned the bluff into a mudslide. Hayes' boots found no purchase. He had to use his hands, digging fingers into the soil, finding rocks, using roots as handholds. His palms were raw, blood mixed with dirt. The salt from the seawater stung. Hayes did not care. Pain was information. Pain meant he was still alive, still climbing, still moving forward. He looked down once. Mistake. The beach spun below him. Bodies. Equipment. Smoke. The surf looked farther away than it should. Hayes realized he was about 40 feet up. Maybe more. A fall from this height would break bones. Might break his neck. Hayes stopped looking down. He focused on the next handhold. Then the next. Climbing was like football. You did not think about the whole field. You thought about the next yard. Then the next. Chain the yards together. And eventually you scored. The MG-42 shifted fire. Hayes heard it tracking left, away from him. He took advantage, climbed faster. His hands found a ledge. He pulled. His body rose. His foot slipped. For a moment he hung by his fingers. His shoulders screamed. His grip started to fail. Then his boot found a root. He pushed, levered himself up, got both arms over the ledge, hauled himself onto it. He lay there for 3 seconds, breathing hard, tasting dirt. Then he kept climbing. Something hit his leg. Not a bullet. A rock. Hayes looked down. The flanking team was moving. They had reached the base of the bluff. They were climbing too, faster than Hayes expected. Jennings was in front. His leg left a blood trail on the rocks, but he was climbing. The second MG-42 opened up. Hayes had been waiting for it. The left gun port lit up. Tracers arced across the beach. Hayes saw Jackson go down. He tumbled backward off the bluff. He hit the sand and did not move. That left 5 in the flanking team. The odds got worse. Hayes pulled himself up another few feet. His hand found a metal stake. German engineers had driven stakes into the bluff, probably to hang wire. Hayes used it to lever himself higher. He was close now, maybe 20 feet from the bunker, close enough to hear voices inside. German shouting, coordinating fire, professional, calm. These were not green troops. These were veterans. Hayes pulled out his grenade. He kept climbing with one hand. Coleman was beside him now. His face was red. Sweat poured down his cheeks, but his eyes were focused. Hayes pointed at the gun port. Coleman nodded. He pulled his own grenade. Torres was on Hayes's left. He had blood on his shirt. The shoulder wound had opened up, but he was still climbing. Hayes checked the flanking team. They were close. Sullivan had reached a small ledge 10 feet from the bunker. He crouched there, catching his breath. Jennings pulled himself up beside him. Ford came next. Then Jackson. Wait, Jackson was dead. Hayes blinked. It was not Jackson. It was a corporal. Hayes did not recognize. The man must have joined them from another unit. Hayes did not have time to wonder about it. The MG-42 in the right port swung toward the flanking team. Hayes saw it happening. He yelled a warning. His voice was lost in the gunfire. Sullivan saw the muzzle turning. He threw himself flat. The burst missed him by inches. Jennings was not as fast. Rounds stitched across his chest. He fell. His body slid down the bluff and disappeared into the smoke below. Hayes felt something break inside him. Jennings had made it this far. He had climbed with a shredded leg. He had kept going when any sane man would have quit. And now he was gone. Hayes thought about the tourniquet. If Jennings had kept it on, he would still be behind the seawall, still alive. Hayes had told him to take it off. Hayes had killed him as surely as the German gunner. No, that was not how it worked. Jennings had made his choice. Every man on this beach was making choices. Some lived, some died. The only choice that mattered now was whether to keep climbing. Hayes kept climbing. He reached a narrow shelf 10 feet from the bunker. Torres and Coleman crawled up beside him. The shelf was barely wide enough for the three of them. Hayes pulled the pin on his grenade. He looked at Torres and Coleman. They pulled their pins. Hayes held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. They threw together. The grenades arced through the air. 2 went into the right gun port. 1 missed and bounced off the concrete. The explosion was muffled. Inside the bunker, Hayes pressed himself against the bluff. The blast wave rolled over him. Hot air and dust. His ears rang. The MG-42 stopped firing. Hayes waited. 5 seconds. 10. The gun stayed silent. He looked at Torres. Torres grinned. His teeth were bloody. He had bitten his tongue at some point. He said that was 1 down. Hayes agreed. 1 down, 1 to go. The left MG-42 was still firing. It swept the beach, methodical and deadly. Hayes could not see the flanking team anymore. Too much smoke. He hoped they were still moving. He hoped Sullivan had made it. He hoped the corporal he did not recognize was finding a way in. He hoped a lot of things. Hope did not stop bullets. Hayes started climbing again. The bunker was right above him now. He could touch the concrete. It was pocked with bullet holes from the naval bombardment. The shells had chipped the surface but had not penetrated. The bunker was solid, over-engineered. The Germans built things to last. Hayes found the entrance, a steel door set into the rear of the bunker, closed, probably barred from inside. Hayes pressed his ear against it. He heard voices. At least 3 men, maybe more. They were arguing. One voice was calm, giving orders. The others were panicked. The grenades had scared them. Good. Scared men made mistakes. Coleman climbed up beside Hayes. He asked how they were going to get in. Hayes said they were not. Coleman looked confused. Hayes pointed at the door hinges. They were on the outside. Old design. A weakness. Hayes pulled out his rifle. He used the butt to hammer at the top hinge. The pin started to move. Torres joined him. Together they pounded at the hinges. The pins came loose. The door sagged. Hayes and Torres grabbed it and pulled. The door came free. The interior of the bunker was dark. Hayes saw shapes moving. He fired 3 rounds into the darkness. Someone screamed. Hayes ducked back. Return fire ripped through the doorway. Bullets sparked off stone. Hayes waited for the firing to stop. Then he pulled another grenade. He tossed it inside. He did not wait for the explosion. He moved left, away from the door. The grenade went off. More screaming. Torres went in first. He fired as he entered. Hayes followed. The bunker was small, maybe 12 feet across. 3 Germans, 1 was dead, another was wounded, clutching his stomach. The third stood by the left gun port. He was trying to swing the MG-42 around. Hayes shot him twice. The German fell across the gun. The wounded German said something. Hayes did not speak German. The man pointed at his stomach. Hayes understood. The man wanted help. Hayes checked him. The wound was bad. Intestines visible. The man would die. Maybe in an hour. Maybe in 10 minutes. Hayes had no morphine to give him. He had given it all to the men behind the seawall. Hayes looked at the German's face. Young, maybe 20. No, 25. Hard to tell. War-aged people. Made their faces gaunt. Their eyes hollow. This soldier had probably been fighting since Poland. 5 years of war. 5 years of killing. Now he was dying in a French bunker. Shot by Americans he had never met. for reasons he probably did not understand. The German's tunic had medals. Hayes recognized one, the Iron Cross. That meant the man was a veteran. It meant he was good at his job. His job was killing Allied soldiers. Men like Hayes, men like Torres and Coleman and Sullivan. The German had probably killed dozens, maybe hundreds. Now he was asking Hayes for water. The irony was not lost on Hayes. Coleman came through the door. He saw the wounded German and froze. He asked what they should do. Hayes did not know. The rules said prisoners were to be treated humanely. The rules said wounded enemies deserved medical care. The rules did not say what to do when you had no medical supplies and a beach full of your own men dying. The rules assumed you had choices. Hayes had no choices, only reactions. Hayes thought about Jennings, about the morphine he had used, about the tourniquet the kid had removed, about the climb that killed him. Hayes had made decisions that led to Jennings's death. Now he was making a decision about this German. Whatever he chose, someone would pay. That was the nature of command. Every choice had consequences, usually bad ones. The German's breathing changed, faster, shallower. He was going into shock. Hayes knew the signs: pale skin, rapid pulse, confusion. The man kept asking for something. Water, or his mother. Hard to tell. The words blurred together. Hayes looked at the German's hand. A wedding ring. Gold band. Simple. Worn. This soldier had a wife somewhere. Maybe children. They would get a telegram, just like Bishop's girlfriend. Just like Martinez's parents. War did not discriminate. It killed Germans and Americans with equal efficiency. Hayes looked at the German. The man was young, maybe 25. He had a wedding ring. Hayes thought about the letter from his wife, the one soaking in the channel. He thought about the baby he might never meet. Torres made the decision. He gave the German his canteen. The German drank. Torres said something in Spanish. Hayes did not speak Spanish either, but he understood the tone. It was a prayer. Torres crossed himself. Then he stood and moved to the gun port. He said they had work to do. Hayes looked out the right gun port. The beach was still chaos, but some boats were making it in now. More men were reaching the seawall. The other bunkers were still firing, but the volume had decreased. Someone had taken out another position. Maybe the flanking team, maybe another unit. It did not matter. Progress was progress. Sullivan appeared in the doorway. He was bleeding from a dozen places. Small cuts, shrapnel wounds, nothing fatal. He said the rest of the flanking team was gone. Ford had taken a burst crossing the final stretch. The corporal had made it to the bunker, but caught a grenade fragment in the throat. Sullivan had watched him bleed out in seconds. Sullivan's hands were still red. Hayes asked if Sullivan could fight. Sullivan said yes. Hayes believed him. Sullivan had made it this far. That meant something. Hayes told him to cover the door. Sullivan nodded. He took position and aimed his rifle down the path. His hands were steady. The shaking was gone. Hayes had seen that before too. Some men fell apart under fire. Some men found themselves. Hayes moved to the left gun port. The MG-42 was still loaded. He pulled the dead German away from the weapon. The body was heavy. Hayes dragged it to the corner. He tried not to look at the face. He failed. The German was young, blonde hair, blue eyes. He looked like half the farm boys Hayes had coached back in Kansas. War did not care about looks. Hayes checked the ammunition. 2 belts. Maybe 500 rounds. Enough. He swung the gun toward the beach. He saw German positions firing. He saw muzzle flashes from other bunkers. He started taking them out, one by one. He fired in short bursts, just like the German gunner had. Efficient, professional. The MG-42 hammered in his hands. Spent brass piled at his feet. Torres joined him at the right port. They worked together, suppressing enemy positions, supporting the men on the beach. Hayes saw troops moving up the bluff now. Engineers with explosives, infantry with flamethrowers. The assault was gaining momentum. The beach was still deadly, but it was no longer impossible. Coleman was tending the wounded German. Hayes watched him. Coleman had frozen earlier, behind the seawall, his hands shaking, his rifle wrapped in plastic. Now he was bandaging an enemy soldier, using his own first aid kit, talking softly, keeping the man calm. Hayes did not stop him. They had taken the bunker. They had neutralized the gun. They had time for mercy now. The German died 5 minutes later. Coleman closed his eyes. He said a few words. Hayes did not hear them over the gunfire. Coleman stood and picked up his rifle. He asked what was next. Hayes said they hold the bunker until relieved. Coleman asked how long that would be. Hayes said he did not know. It might be an hour. It might be all day. Coleman accepted that. He took position at the door and waited. Hayes kept firing. He was methodical. Target, burst, shift. Target, burst, shift. The MG-42 was brutally effective. He understood why the Germans loved it. He understood why American troops feared it. 1,500 rounds per minute. That was not a gun. That was a saw. It cut through cover. It cut through courage. It cut through everything. Another American squad reached the bunker. A lieutenant led them. Young, maybe 23. He looked shocked to see Hayes and his men. He asked how they had taken the position. Hayes told him. The lieutenant shook his head. He said that was impossible. Hayes pointed at the dead Germans. He said it was not impossible. It was just expensive. The lieutenant asked about casualties. Hayes told him. The lieutenant went quiet. He looked at Sullivan, at Torres, at Coleman. 3 men left from Hayes's original team, plus Hayes made 4. The lieutenant asked where the rest were. Hayes said they were on the beach. The lieutenant understood. He did not ask any more questions. The lieutenant said his orders were to push inland, secure the high ground. He asked if Hayes and his men wanted to join. Hayes looked at his rifle. 1 round left. He had no more magazines. Torres had half a magazine. Coleman had 3 rounds. Sullivan had 5. They had 1 grenade among them. No food, no water. Hayes's canteen had been lost on the beach. He was running on adrenaline and willpower. That would last maybe another hour, maybe less. Hayes said they would hold the bunker. The lieutenant nodded. He said he would send medics back when he could. Hayes said that would be appreciated. The lieutenant left. His squad followed. They moved fast, staying low, professional. Hayes watched them disappear into the smoke. He hoped they would make it. He hoped someone would make it. Torres sat down. His shoulder had stopped bleeding, but his face was grey. He said he needed to rest. Just for a minute. Hayes told him to rest. Torres closed his eyes. His breathing was shallow. Shock was setting in. Hayes had seen it before. The body could only take so much. Torres had given everything. Now his body was sending him a bill. Coleman brought water. He had found a German canteen. He gave Torres a drink. Then Sullivan. Then Hayes. The water was warm and tasted like metal. Hayes did not care. He drank. His throat was raw from breathing smoke and yelling orders. The water helped. Not much, but some. Hayes checked his watch. 0749 hours. 1 hour and 4 minutes since the ramp dropped. It felt like a lifetime. He looked out at the beach. Bodies floated in the surf. Equipment littered the sand. Destroyed boats burned at the waterline. But men were moving inland now. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. The assault was working. Slowly, terribly. But working. Hayes thought about the 32 men who had followed him off the boat. 11 had made it to the seawall. 7 had climbed the bluff. 4 were still alive. That was a survival rate of 12%. Hayes did not know if that was good or bad. He knew it was not good enough. He thought about Jennings. The kid with the shredded leg. The kid who had climbed anyway. The kid who died 10 feet from safety. Hayes wondered if Jennings's sisters would understand. He wondered what he would write in the letter. He wondered if he would survive long enough to write it. Sullivan asked what Hayes was thinking about. Hayes said nothing. Sullivan said Hayes looked like he was thinking about something. Hayes admitted he was thinking about the letters. Sullivan nodded. He said he thought about that too. Every time someone went down, what would the letter say? How would it explain? Hayes said there was no explanation. You put words on paper. You sent them home. The words did not change anything. The person was still dead. The family still hurt. The letter was just a formality. A way for the living to pretend they had said something meaningful. Sullivan said that was dark. Hayes said it was true. Sullivan thought about it. Then he agreed. Coleman was praying. Hayes could see his lips moving. He could not hear the words. Coleman was Catholic. He had told Hayes that on the ship, he carried a rosary in his pocket. Hayes wondered if it was still there. He wondered if God was listening. He wondered if God cared about a beach in France. Hayes was not religious. His wife was. She prayed every night. Hayes had always envied that certainty. The belief that someone was watching, that someone cared. Hayes looked at the dead men in the bunker. If someone was watching, they were doing a poor job. Torres opened his eyes. He asked if they had held. Hayes said yes. Torres smiled. He said good. He said he was tired. Hayes said to rest. Torres closed his eyes again. This time he did not open them. His breathing slowed, then stopped. Hayes checked for a pulse. Nothing. Torres was gone. Heart had given out, or blood loss, or shock. It did not matter which. The result was the same. Coleman stopped praying. He saw Torres. He started praying again. Faster? Hayes let him. If prayer helped, that was fine. Hayes had other concerns, like the fact that they were down to 3 effectives, like the fact that German counterattacks were inevitable, like the fact that holding this bunker suddenly seemed much harder. Sullivan asked if they should fall back, find another unit. Hayes said no. They had taken this position. They would hold it. That was the job. Sullivan did not argue. He just nodded and went back to watching the door. Hayes appreciated that. Some men argued. Some men followed orders. Sullivan was a follower. That made him valuable. Every unit needed followers. Leaders got the glory. Followers did the work. Hayes heard engines. He looked down the bluff. Tanks were coming. Shermans. They crawled up the beach like beetles. Slow, awkward, but moving. The engineers had cleared enough obstacles to make a path. The tanks would reach the top of the bluff soon. After that, the German positions would collapse. Concrete bunkers could stop bullets. They could not stop 75mm shells. A German soldier appeared on the path. Rifle raised. Hayes shot him. 1 round. Center mass. The German fell. Hayes did not feel anything. No satisfaction. No guilt. Just empty. He had killed before. Tunisia. Sicily. Italy. This was just one more. He would probably kill again before the day was over. It was just part of the job now. Like coaching football, except the stakes were higher, and there were no second chances. More Germans appeared. 4 of them. Hayes could not get them all. Sullivan fired. Coleman fired. 2 Germans went down. The other 2 retreated. Hayes waited. They would try again. Germans were persistent that way. They had discipline. Training. 5 years of war had taught them how to fight. The Americans were learning fast, but they were still learning. The Germans had already graduated. Hayes reloaded the MG-42. He found another belt on the dead gunner. 200 rounds. He fed it into the weapon. The gun was hot. The barrel glowed. Hayes did not care. He aimed down the path and waited. The Germans came again, 6 this time. Hayes opened fire. The MG-42 roared. The path became a kill zone. Bodies piled up. The survivors fled. Hayes stopped firing. He counted his ammunition. 100 rounds left. Not enough for another attack. He would have to make every shot count. Coleman asked how many more were out there. Hayes said he did not know. Coleman asked what they would do when the ammunition ran out. Hayes said they would use rifles. Coleman asked what they would do when the rifle ammunition ran out. Hayes did not answer. They both knew. A voice called from outside. American, a captain. He said he was coming in. Hayes told him to come ahead. The captain entered with 2 men. He looked around the bunker, at the dead Germans, at Torres, at Sullivan and Coleman, at Hayes. He asked how long they had been holding. Hayes said since 0705. The captain checked his watch. It was 0821. He said that was over an hour. Hayes said he could count. The captain said reinforcements were coming. Engineers to fortify the position, ammunition, medical supplies. He asked if Hayes and his men could hold another 30 minutes. Hayes said yes. The captain looked doubtful. Hayes said to trust him. The captain nodded. He said he did. Then he left. Coleman asked if Hayes really thought they could hold. Hayes said they had to. Coleman asked why. Hayes said because if they did not, someone else would have to, and that someone else might not make it. Coleman thought about that. Then he nodded. He said he understood. Sullivan was hit. 10 minutes later, a sniper round through the shoulder. He went down hard. Coleman dragged him away from the door. Hayes grabbed a first aid kit from a dead German. He packed the wound. Sullivan was conscious but pale. He had lost blood. How much? Hayes could not tell. He gave Sullivan the last of the water. Sullivan drank. He asked if he was going to die. Hayes said no. Sullivan asked how Hayes knew. Hayes said he did not, but saying yes would not help. Hayes and Coleman held the bunker alone for the next 20 minutes. Germans probed 3 more times. Each attack was smaller than the last. They were running out of men too, or they were being called back to defend other positions. Either way, the pressure eased. Hayes allowed himself to hope, just a little. Hope was dangerous, but he was too tired to fight it. The reinforcements arrived at 0843, a full squad. Fresh troops. They had not been on the beach. They had landed in the second wave. They looked clean. Their uniforms were not torn. Their faces were not grey with exhaustion. Hayes envied them. He also resented them. They had not earned this bunker. Hayes and his men had, with blood and bodies. These newcomers were just occupying space. A medic checked Sullivan. He said the wound was not fatal. Sullivan would need surgery, but he would live. The medic asked about Torres. Hayes said he was gone. The medic checked anyway, confirmed it. He pulled a blanket over Torres's body. He asked if there were any other wounded. Hayes said no. The medic looked at Hayes's leg. Hayes looked down. His pants were soaked with blood. He had not noticed. The medic cut away the fabric. Shrapnel in the calf. Not deep. The medic cleaned it and wrapped it. He said Hayes was lucky. Hayes said luck had nothing to do with it. The squad sergeant told Hayes he was relieved. Hayes should head to the aid station. Get checked. Get some rest. Hayes said he was fine. The sergeant said it was an order. Hayes looked at Coleman. Coleman was sitting against the wall. His eyes were closed. His rifle was across his lap. He was asleep or unconscious. Hayes could not tell. Sullivan was on a stretcher. 2 men were carrying him out. Torres was dead. Hayes had no one left to command. Hayes stood. His leg almost gave out. The medic caught him. He said Hayes needed to rest. Hayes said there was no time for rest. The medic said to make time. Hayes tried to argue. The words would not come. His brain was shutting down. Adrenaline crash. He had been running on fumes for over an hour. Now the tank was empty. The medic helped Hayes out of the bunker. The sunlight was blinding. Hayes blinked. His eyes adjusted. He looked down at the beach. It was still a mess, but it was not chaos anymore. It was organized. Troops moved in columns, supplies came ashore, officers directed traffic. The beach was becoming a base. The invasion was working. Hayes saw the dog tag in the surf. It was still there, spinning in the foam. He walked down to it. His leg screamed. He ignored it. He reached the water. He picked up the tag. The name was Bishop, from Weapons Platoon. Hayes had read his file. Bishop was from Ohio. He had wanted to be a teacher. He had a girlfriend back home. She sent him letters every week. Now she would get a telegram instead. Hayes put the tag in his pocket. He would turn it in later. They would send it home, with Bishop's personal effects. A watch, a wallet, maybe the letters from his girlfriend. Hayes wondered if she would keep them. He wondered if she would read them again. He wondered if it would help. A jeep pulled up. The driver said he was heading to the aid station. Hayes could ride. Hayes climbed in. Coleman was already in the back. Awake now. He looked at Hayes. He said they made it. Hayes said yes. Coleman said a lot of men did not. Hayes said he knew. Coleman asked if it was worth it. Hayes looked back at the bunker, at the bluff, at the beach, at the bodies. He said he did not know. Coleman said that was an honest answer. Hayes said honesty was all he had left. The jeep drove inland, away from the beach, away from the gunfire. The sound faded. Hayes felt his body relax. His hands stopped shaking. His breathing slowed. He closed his eyes. Just for a moment, the jeep bounced over rough ground, French countryside, fields, stone walls, hedgerows. Hayes had seen pictures in the briefing. The terrain looked different in person, more complicated, more dangerous. Good defensive ground. The Germans would use it well. Every hedgerow was a bunker. Every stone wall was a firing position. Taking this land would cost blood. Lots of it. Hayes added that to his list of concerns. The list kept growing. The driver said something. Hayes did not hear it. His ears were still ringing. The driver repeated louder. He asked if Hayes was okay. Hayes said yes. The driver nodded. Every soldier said they were okay. None were, but okay was what you said, because not okay meant going home, and going home meant someone else took your place. Someone younger, less experienced. Someone who would die faster. So everyone said okay, and everyone kept fighting. Coleman sat beside Hayes in the back. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. Hayes recognized that look. Coleman was still on the beach. His body had left, but his mind remained. It would take days for Coleman to really leave. Maybe weeks. Some men never left. They walked around. They talked. They followed orders. But part of them stayed in the last fight. Forever. When Hayes opened his eyes, they were at the aid station, a tent in a field. Wounded men everywhere. Medics moving between them. Efficient, professional, overwhelmed. Hayes reported in. A doctor checked him, said the leg was fine. The shrapnel had missed the bone. The blood loss was minor. Hayes would be back on duty in a day. Maybe 2. The doctor asked if Hayes wanted morphine. Hayes said no. Save it for men who needed it. The doctor said Hayes qualified. Hayes said there were men who qualified more. The doctor did not argue. Hayes found a corner of the tent. He sat down. His body ached. Every muscle, every bone. He had not realized how tired he was. Coleman sat beside him. He said they should sleep. Hayes agreed, but he did not close his eyes. He kept seeing the beach, the bodies, the dog tag. Bishop, Martinez, Jennings, Torres, Jackson, Ford, the corporal, he never learned the name of, all the others. 32 men had followed him off the boat. 4 had made it this far. The mathematics did not work. The cost was too high. Coleman asked what Hayes was thinking. Hayes said he was thinking about the letters. Coleman said Hayes had mentioned that before. Hayes said it was all he could think about. What would he write? How would he explain? Coleman said maybe he did not have to explain. Maybe he just had to tell the truth. Hayes asked what the truth was. Coleman said the truth was, they did their job, they followed orders, they fought, some lived, some died, that was war. Hayes considered that. Coleman was right, there was no other truth, no deeper meaning, just men following orders, just men trying to survive. Some succeeded, some failed. The only difference was luck, and luck was not something you could explain in a letter. A sergeant came by. He had a clipboard. He asked for names, units, casualty reports. Hayes gave him the information. The sergeant wrote it down. He said Hayes and Coleman would be reassigned. New unit, new mission. They would ship out in 2 days. Hayes asked where. The sergeant said, inland, toward Currington. Hayes nodded. He knew Currington. It was on the map. Another town, another objective, another battle. Coleman asked if it would be like the beach. The sergeant said no. The beach was the worst. Everything after would be easier. Hayes did not believe him. He had heard that before. In Tunisia, they said Sicily would be easier. In Sicily, they said Italy would be easier. In Italy, they said France would be easier. It was never easier. It was just different. Different terrain, different enemies. Same blood. Hayes thought about his wife. The letter. The baby. He wondered if he would ever meet his child. He wondered if his wife would understand what he had done here. He wondered if he would be able to explain it. Probably not. Some things could not be explained, only experienced. And experience was not something you could share. It was something you carried, alone. Coleman fell asleep. His head dropped forward. His breathing deepened. Hayes envied him. Coleman could sleep anywhere. Hayes had never been good at that. His mind did not shut off. It kept running, replaying, analyzing, second-guessing. What if he had gone left instead of right? What if he had waited longer? What if he had moved faster? What if, the two most useless words in the English language? A chaplain moved through the tent. He stopped at each man, asked if they wanted to pray. Most said no. A few said yes. The chaplain knelt with them, spoke softly. Hayes watched. He thought about Coleman's prayers, about Torres crossing himself, about faith. Hayes did not have faith, but he understood why others did. Faith gave meaning. It turned chaos into plan, random death into sacrifice. Hayes preferred chaos. At least chaos was honest. The chaplain reached Hayes. He asked if Hayes wanted to talk. Hayes said no. The chaplain asked if he was sure. Hayes said yes. The chaplain nodded. He said if Hayes changed his mind, he would be around. Hayes thanked him. The chaplain moved on. Hayes watched him go. He wondered what the chaplain would say about the beach, about the bodies, about Bishop and Martinez and Jennings and Torres. Would he say they died for a reason? Would he say God had a plan? Hayes did not want to hear it. If God had a plan, it was a terrible one. Hayes closed his eyes. He tried to sleep. His mind would not cooperate. It kept showing him the beach. The MG-42, the climb, the bunker, Torres, over and over, a loop. Hayes tried to focus on something else. Anything else. He thought about his wife, her smile, her laugh, the way she looked in the morning. The letter, the baby. He tried to imagine holding his child, what that would feel like. He could not picture it. The beach kept intruding. The bodies kept floating back. Time passed. Hayes did not know how much. The tent was busy. Men came and went. Some walked, some were carried, some did not move. Hayes stopped paying attention. He focused on breathing. In 10, out. Simple, mechanical, something he could control. A voice called his name. Hayes opened his eyes. A lieutenant stood over him. Not the same one from the bunker. A different one. Older. Maybe 30. He said he was looking for Sergeant Hayes. Hayes said that was him. The lieutenant asked if he could walk. Hayes said yes. The lieutenant said to come with him. Hayes stood. His leg protested but held. He followed the lieutenant outside. The lieutenant led him to a tent. Inside, a colonel sat behind a desk. Maps covered the surface. Photographs. Reports. The colonel looked up. He asked if Hayes was the one who took the bunker. Hayes said yes. The colonel studied him. He asked how many men Hayes lost. Hayes told him. The colonel nodded. He said that was hard. Hayes agreed. The colonel said he was writing commendations. Hayes and his men had done something extraordinary. They had turned the tide on their section of beach. Without that bunker, the assault would have stalled. More men would have died. The colonel wanted to recognize that. He asked what Hayes wanted. A medal, a promotion, a transfer. Hayes said he wanted his men remembered. The colonel said they would be. Hayes said to make sure. The colonel promised. Hayes left the tent. The sun was setting. He had been on Omaha Beach for 12 hours. It felt like 12 years. He walked back to the aid station. Coleman was awake now. He asked where Hayes had been. Hayes said meeting a colonel. Coleman asked what for. Hayes said commendations. Coleman said that was good. Hayes said it did not bring anyone back. They sat in silence. The sounds of war had faded, just occasional gunfire in the distance. Engines, voices, normal sounds, sounds of an army consolidating. Hayes listened. He tried to find comfort in the normalcy. He could not. The beach was still in his head. The bodies, the blood, the dog tag spinning in the foam. Coleman asked what happened next. Hayes said they rest, then they fight again. Coleman asked if it ever stopped. Hayes said no, not until the war was over, or they were dead, whichever came first. Coleman said that was bleak. Hayes said it was realistic. Coleman thought about it. Then he said maybe realistic was just another word for bleak. Hayes did not disagree. Night fell. The tent filled with the sound of wounded men. Some slept, some groaned, some cried. Hayes listened to all of it. He thought about adding his voice, about crying for Bishop and Martinez and Jennings and Torres, about crying for all the men who had followed him into the water, about crying for himself. He did not. Crying would not change anything. The men were still dead. The beach was still bloody. The war was still happening. Crying was a luxury. Hayes could not afford luxuries. Hayes thought about courage, about what it meant. The colonel had said Hayes and his men were courageous. Hayes did not feel courageous. He felt tired. He felt numb. He felt like he had made a series of decisions and survived by luck. Courage implied choice, implies nobility. Hayes had not felt noble. He had felt desperate. Desperate men did not have courage. They just had momentum. They moved forward because going back was not an option. That was not courage. That was just survival. But maybe that was what courage was. Not some grand gesture, not some noble sacrifice. Just moving forward when every instinct said to stop. Just climbing when falling was easier. Just fighting when surrendering made sense. Maybe courage was just refusing to quit. If that was true, then Hayes had been courageous. So had Torres. So had Coleman. So had Sullivan. So had Jennings and Martinez and all the others. They had all refused to quit. Some had paid for that refusal with their lives. But they had refused. Hayes thought about his high school team, the football players he had coached. He used to tell them that courage was doing the right thing even when it was hard. That sounded good in a locker room. It sounded hollow on a beach. The right thing. What was the right thing? Running up the bluff. That had seemed right. But men had died. Was that right? Hayes did not know. He suspected he would never know. Right and wrong blurred in war. All that remained was action and consequence. Hayes had acted. The consequences were 32 men in the water and 4 survivors in a tent. He remembered specific players. Tommy Briggs, quarterback, smart kid, great arm, He graduated in 1938, enlisted right after Pearl Harbor. Last Hayes heard, Tommy was flying B-17 over Germany. Hayes wondered if he was still alive. He wondered if Tommy thought about courage the same way Hayes did now. Probably not. Pilots had a different war. They flew missions, came back, flew again, clean, mechanical, not like infantry. Infantry waded through mud and blood. Infantry watched friends die 3 feet away. Infantry carried bodies. Pilots just counted empty seats at dinner. Hayes had another player, Marcus Webb, linebacker, hit like a truck. Mean kid, not in a bad way, just competitive. Marcus would do anything to win, break every rule, take every penalty. As long as his team won, Hayes spent hours teaching Marcus about discipline, about playing within the rules, about being a good sport. Marcus listened, nodded, then went out and played the same way. Some people could not be taught. They had to learn through experience. Marcus probably made a good soldier. The army liked people who did whatever it took to win. Hayes wished he could talk to his team now, tell them what war was really like. Not the glory, not the medals, just the grinding reality, the exhaustion, the fear, the math that never added up, the choices that had no good answers. Maybe that would help. Maybe they would understand that football was preparation for life, not because it taught courage, but because it taught you to keep moving when you were tired, to follow the play even when it made no sense, to trust your teammates even when you could not see them. Those lessons mattered more than courage. Courage got you killed. Discipline kept you alive. Coleman spoke. He said he was glad Hayes had been there. Hayes asked why. Coleman said because Hayes knew what to do. Hayes said he had just guessed. Coleman said that was better than nothing. Hayes supposed that was true. A guess was better than paralysis. Hayes had guessed they should climb. He had guessed they should attack. He had guessed they would survive. He had been right about 2 out of 3. That was not a good average, but it was better than 0. Hayes closed his eyes again. This time sleep came. Not deep, not restful, but sleep. He dreamed about the beach, about the dog tag, about Bishop. In the dream, Hayes picked up the tag and Bishop stood up. Water poured from his uniform. His face was grey. His eyes were empty. He asked Hayes why he had taken so long. Hayes did not have an answer. He tried to speak, but no words came. Bishop waited. The surf rolled in behind him. Each wave brought more bodies. They stood up too. Martinez, Jennings, Torres, Jackson, Ford, all the others, 32 men. They formed a line. They stared at Hayes, waiting for an explanation. Hayes tried to tell them it was not his fault. The plan had failed. The intelligence was wrong. The beach was supposed to be clear, but the words stuck in his throat. Because the words were lies. Or maybe not lies, maybe just excuses. Hayes had given the orders. Hayes had led them up the ramp. Hayes had survived. They had not. That made it his fault. Explanations did not change that fact. In the dream, the men started walking toward him. Slow, steady. Their boots made no sound on the sand. Hayes tried to run. His legs would not move. He was stuck, frozen. The men kept coming. Bishop reached him first. He put his hand on Hayes's shoulder. His touch was cold, like ice. He leaned close. He whispered something. Hayes could not hear it over the surf. He asked Bishop to repeat it. Bishop smiled, not a happy smile, a knowing smile. He said Hayes already knew the answer. Then everything went black. Hayes woke up. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His heart pounded. His hands shook. He checked his surroundings. The tent, the wounded men, Coleman sleeping nearby. Real, not a dream. Hayes took a deep breath. The nightmare faded, but the feeling stayed. Guilt. Heavy and thick. It sat in his chest like a stone. Hayes knew that feeling would not leave. It would stay with him for days, maybe years, maybe forever. That was the price of command. You carried your dead, every one of them. They never got lighter. He stood. His leg was stiff but functional. He walked outside. The night air was cool. Hayes breathed it in. He looked up at the stars. They were the same stars that hung over Kansas, over his wife, over his unborn child. That thought gave him comfort. Just a little. The universe was big. The war was small. That perspective helped. Not much, but some. Hayes thought about tomorrow, about reassignment, about quarantine, about whatever came next. He thought about the letters he would write to Bishop's girlfriend, to Jennings' sisters, to Martinez's parents, to Torres's family. He would write them all. He would tell them their sons and brothers and husbands had been brave. He would tell them they had died quickly. He would tell them lies that made grief easier, because that was all he could give them. Comfortable lies wrapped in official letterhead. Hayes had written letters before. After Tunisia, after Sicily, after Italy, each one got harder. The first few had been honest, too honest. He had told families their boys had suffered, that death had not been quick, that the last moments had been filled with pain and fear. The responses to those letters haunted Hayes. Mothers asking why their sons had to suffer, wives asking why God had not shown mercy. Hayes learned his lesson. Honesty served no purpose. It only added pain to grief. So he started lying. Clean deaths. Instant. No suffering. The families felt better. Hayes felt worse. But that was the trade. His conscience for their peace. A fair exchange. Bishop's girlfriend would get a letter saying he died instantly. Enemy fire. Never knew what hit him. No pain. Hayes would not mention the water. The tide. The way Bishop had probably drowned. Struggling. Gasping. Alone. That detail served no purpose. Let her think he died like a soldier. Quick and clean. Let her keep that image. It was kinder. Jennings' sisters would hear their brother died heroically, leading an assault, taking enemy position, never mentioning the leg, the blood trail, the climb that killed him 10 feet from safety. Let them think he died for something meaningful, not just stubbornness and bad luck. Martinez's parents would learn their son died beside his friends, surrounded by comrades, not alone in the surf, not face down in the sand, not forgotten. Hayes would make sure they knew Martinez had been remembered, had been honored, had mattered. Even if none of it was true, even if Martinez had died before anyone could reach him, even if his body was just one more corpse among thousands, his parents would never know that. They would carry a different truth, a better truth, Hayes' gift to them. But Hayes would also write the truth, just for himself. He would write about the blood in the sand, about the dog tag in the surf, about the climb that killed Jennings, about Torres dying in a bunker surrounded by German corpses. He would write about his own fear, his own doubt, his own desperate guessing. He would write it all down, then he would lock it away, because the truth was not something families needed. The truth was something Hayes needed to carry alone. Coleman joined him outside. He said he could not sleep either. Hayes said it was the same for everyone. After combat, the body stayed wired, ready. It took days to come down. Coleman asked if it ever got easier. Hayes said no. Coleman said that was what he figured. They stood together in the dark, not talking, just being two men who had survived. For now, the sun came up. June 7th, D-Day +1. Hayes watched the light spread across the field. He thought about the men on the beach, the dead ones. They would never see another sunrise. Hayes would. That did not feel like a victory. It just felt like a fact. Hayes was alive. They were not. That was the only difference that mattered. Everything else was just noise. An officer called for Hayes and Coleman. Time to move. New assignment. Hayes picked up his rifle. Coleman did the same. They walked toward the jeep. Neither looked back at the tent. There was nothing to see, just wounded men and memories. Hayes had enough of both. He climbed into the jeep. Coleman sat beside him. The driver started the engine. They drove away from the beach, toward whatever came next. Hayes did not think about it. He just held his rifle and watched the road. That was all he could do. Hold on and keep moving. It had worked so far, it would have to keep working. There was no other choice.